Who's going to win?
I cannot believe you started with that. It's a dead heat. It truly is a dead heat. Yeah. We could look through the entrails of birds. We could try, but there's no way we could tell at this point. It literally is a dead heat. And if anything, the race is tightening. So it's, both of them are within the margin of errors in all of the critical states. So it's anybody's guess at this point.
Looking at it from the outside, and I suppose that speaks into this idea that you can't tell who's going to win. Your country feels like quite a divided society. And I know when you got the job that you're in now, one of the things that you said is that you saw yourself as something as a bridge builder. I wonder if you could paint a picture of that division and what that division is about. Because, our politics and your politics are, they're not the same and they're really quite different. So just give us a sense of what that division is within American society.
Well, for one thing, it's a partisan division. So along partisan lines, Republicans and Democrats in the country, essentially the country is split with about 35% belonging to each party and the rest sort of up for grabs in the middle, but they're not really up for grabs. So many of the people who kind of seem to fall in the middle politically actually lean so strongly in one partisan direction or another that it's far closer than those numbers suggest. It really is about a 48-48 split in reality, with just a tiny percentage in the middle that are truly up for grabs. So one of the ways of thinking about that polarization is to think about it along partisan lines. But it's not just along partisan lines. That same split is reinforced in a number of other ways, along class lines, along education lines. It's reinforced geographically, so that I think even here in the UK, you've heard about red states and blue states. So it's a very deep split in the country, and we have multiple causes behind that split and multiple ways of sort of slicing and dicing the demographics that line up along the chasm between the two political parties. So that's the nature of the polarization that we're facing.
Culture wars, economics.
Culture wars, economics, these are both, evidences, areas, venues where we see this split playing out. So, wherever you stand on LGBTQ plus issues, wherever you stand on the role of religion in society, where you stand on, the proper role for the Federal Reserve in regards to monetary policy, all of those things fall along this chasm, this polarization in American culture and American society, American politics.
And how on earth will the next president of the United States also reach out to those who don't vote for him/her?
First of all, they must. There's no way, in fact, that the level of this polarization can be sustained. Ultimately, a polarization at the level that we're seeing in the United States, and frankly, I think a polarization that we're seeing, throughout the West, I don't think that ultimately that polarization is sustainable. So all governments necessarily, I think, need to find ways to bridge it. And I expect whether it's Kamala Harris or former President Trump that's in the White House next January, either president would absolutely have to figure out ways to modulate or bridge that kind of polarization.
But the divisions are so visceral, and there's sort of something approaching political hatred almost that you get in, you see.
I would say it doesn't even approach political hatred. In many cases, it truly is political hatred. But the reality is that without bridging it, government is impossible. We see that already in the United States in the inability of Congress, for example, to pass legislation in the normal processes because of that division. So, in a sense, the system ultimately either forces us to address that polarization to try to bridge it in some way, or the system breaks down. And I just, call me Pollyanna, but I just can't imagine that it will get to the point that the system itself will break down. That ultimately, we'll come up to the precipice perhaps, but then recognize the need for bridge building. As I said, regardless of which person wins the presidency.
I guess now is about the most partisan time. Just this.
In the month before the election, yeah. Of course, partisanship reaches its peak and the polarization is is likely at its peak at this point as well.
You mentioned religion, and I'd be really interested to know if you could paint a picture of how religion feeds into this sort of division. Does it help it? Does it make it worse? Just start with that, because I've got a few more questions about that.
Well, you probably know as well as I do, Giles, that religion is divided as well, both within denominations and across denominations. The same tensions of polarization are at work. So I belong to the Roman Catholic Church, as you heard from my introduction. And the Roman Catholic Church in the United States is split along this same line of polarization. There are liberal Catholics and there are conservative Catholics, and those differences line up almost precisely with their political preferences. So we could say there are Democratic Catholics and there are Republican Catholics, and it's the same.
Is it about 48-48 the same?
It's about, within the Catholic population, it's about the same. In different denominations, if you look at evangelicals, you'll see that it's about 80% that are more conservative and about 20% that tend to be more liberals. Among mainline Protestant denominations, it's closer to what we see with Catholics, closer to a 50-50 split. But all the denominations in the United States are split. And yet, at the same time, religion is part of the process as well. So both candidates we see in the United States are using religion or appealing to religion to mobilize their voters around issues that they prefer or that they oppose. And so religion kind of enters in that way too. Religion is tapped as one of the mechanisms to engage in the campaigning that's going on right now.
I don't know, I've got no evidence for this, and this is just a sort of gut feeling, but when I sort of turn the news on and listen to some of the stuff that's coming out of the American election campaign, there seems to be slightly less emphasis on religion than there might have been in some of the elections in the past. Slightly less connection between, say, Republicans and conservative evangelicals. I might have got that wrong, but have I?
That's an interesting insight, Giles. To some extent, I think that's true for both parties. It's not that it's not occurring, but the role of religion in these campaigns isn't quite as public as it has been in the past. And it's interesting to speculate why. Maybe that's what your follow-up question is. In one sense, the former President Trump is, I think, proving to be a little bit difficult to square with religiosity on the right. And on the other side...
I mean, people are laughing here because help us to see that, because I wanted to say something that was rude at that point, which was like, how can it not be otherwise? I mean, this man is a felon. This man has said some things that is just sort of utterly outrageous. I do find it baffling that people of faith can hold their nose to the extent that they can and think that he might be, their man.
The thinking in some quarters on the right, on the religious right, is that regardless of the flawed character of this particular candidate, that nevertheless he is in some way associated with an historical movement that will restore or strengthen the role of particularly Christian religion in the world. That truly is their thought. And so, I think that explains some of it. I have to say, though, some of it is much more pragmatic, frankly. In the former Trump administration, that administration did much to advance the cause of evangelicals in American society. And you could look at everything from, his appointment of Supreme Court justices to, well, frankly, to his support for the work that I do, the role of the U.S. government in protecting religious freedom around the world. So some of it is pragmatic, but there is also, I think, that theological idea that there's a movement, historical movement associated with the success of Christianity, and that Trump in some way is part of that.
So let's just move on from that. I mean, we've got some questions at the end, so we're going to I'm sure we'll return to some of that stuff. But I'd quite like to talk to you also about the work of your commission and the fact that you're spending half your life on aeroplanes going all the way around the world looking at different places. So when you look at religious freedom worldwide, what are your particular concerns?
Well, frankly, I see religious freedom in retreat around the world right at the moment, and even in comparison to where the world was 20 years ago, I think we see a greater challenge for religious freedom. And when I say religious freedom here, I don't mean just religious freedom. We say freedom of religion or belief, including the if you choose not to believe, that too is part of freedom of religion or belief. And so, by this I include, not just people who belong to organized religions, like Islam or Christianity, but people who practice indigenous religions and people who choose atheism or agnosticism. All of these things are what we understand as freedom of religion or belief. And those freedoms are in jeopardy around the world right now, spiking concern everywhere, I think, about these fundamental freedoms.
Why is that?
I think there are a couple of reasons, a number of different reasons. One of the reasons, frankly, is the rise of authoritarianism. So the erosion of democracy around the world and the rise of authoritarian regimes around the world squeezes out the space for religious freedom. And that's because authoritarian regimes, understandably, see religion with its appeal to some kind of outside authority, God, their faith, their holy book, an appeal outside of politics, outside of the authoritarian regime for, to justify their actions or determine, what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. And that's a challenge to authoritarian regimes. So fundamentally, as we see the rise of authoritarianism, we see a closing of the space in which, these freedoms of conscience and belief and faith, lose ground. But other things are happening as well. Since October 7th, and I guess yesterday was the anniversary of October 7th, we've seen specifically a rise of anti-Semitism and Muslim hatred around the world that are closely associated with the conflict in Palestine. Closely associated with that situation. And so that too is, I think, one of the reasons that we see, this kind of spike. And, we could go beyond that to, address other things, but I suspect that those are probably the two main drivers of this. If there's a third that I might just kind of toss out as a hint, I think the unfolding of globalization generally is causing a number of changes that seem to be related to this. It has created, I think, a sense in many populations of dislocation or insecurity that for one reason or another either incline them to become so passionate about their own religiosity that they look at other beliefs as in an antagonistic way, or cause them to lead them to abandon their beliefs and become skeptical or resistant or even opposed to religion of any sort. I think that might be a potential third reason, but that's not something I want to go to the mat on.
You in your first answer, you counterposed authoritarian regimes with democracy. But of course, you've just published a report on India. India has just recently had, I think, the largest election human history has ever known. But you're still worried about, in that world's largest democracy, perhaps, you're still worried about religious freedom there, I guess, with Hindu nationalism and all that sort of stuff. So it's not just about democracies, and there's other ways of thinking about that.
Yes, I think India is actually a telling example for the current situation in many regards. What's happened in India is, you just heard from Giles, is the rise of a religious nationalism associated with the Hindu faith that has become identified with the BJP party and Prime Minister Modi's government. And that combination of things has, in a way similar to the argument that I made about authoritarianism, has sort of closed out the space for other religions to be able to exercise their beliefs freely. And so we see a number of incidences of communal violence against Muslims, against Christian communities, and increasingly even other religious religions in India are at risk as well. Sikhs, for example, are at risk. Jains are at risk. Untouchables are at risk. So it's very interesting to see this play out. I don't think that it's quite the same. I wouldn't call Modi's government an authoritarian government, but nevertheless, its operation in public life is working in the same way as an authoritarian government to close out that space that where these fundamental freedoms are able to operate.
One of the interesting things, just one more thing on India, one of the interesting things about Modi, it seems to me, is that Modi is both a sort of secular leader, but also casts himself as a sort of quasi-religious leader. There's a blurring between, church and state, as it were. So when he opened the Ayodhya temple in Uttar Pradesh earlier this year, really, big and very significant thing. He was there almost leading the nation as the priest of the nation. Now, this is an unusual situation.
In fact, it's trending in the direction of the sort of theocracy that one sees in a country like Iran, for example, where one religion, and in fact, let's be honest, one interpretation of one religion becomes so dominant that other interpretations of that religion are not allowed, and not only that, but all other religions, all other beliefs, or non-believers like atheists and agnostics, for example, find no space, to be who they are, to believe what they believe, to exercise the worldview that inspires them.
Can we talk a little bit about touch the rail of Israel-Palestine? I suppose I really want to ask this in the connection of young people, actually, and campuses in America and so forth. So I know that your concern is international, but do you have a concern for freedom of speech in those academies, especially some really rather prominent academies in America, where anti-Semitism is sort of looks like it's closing down freedom of speech?
I do have that concern.
Sorry, can we just have a point of information there? You said anti-Semitism is closing down freedom of speech. I beg to differ. I would have thought rather it was more the establishment closing down courageous students speaking out for justice.
So I was
human rights.
Yes, great. So we'll have that. So there's a difference of view about this. So obviously this is an issue of some emotional import.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
But so answer the question between us. Do you see anti-Semitism as being as something that's closing down that, or do you think this is sort of courageous people speaking up against an establishment that's trying to shut them up?
I think both things are occurring, to be honest with you. And freedom of speech and frankly freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, all of those are at risk in these kinds of conflict. Whether in fact it's the students that are closing the space, which I agree to some extent they are. Some of the things that they have done in these encampments, are clearly an effort to throttle speech and to oppose other religions and other ways of thinking. And at the same time, the authorities are operating in a very parallel and similar fashion. I think in the space that we're talking about, the space in which I have a freedom of conscience to believe what I want to believe, to exercise the worldview that inspires me, to practice my Catholic faith or whatever other faiths there might be. All of those things I think are at risk right now in conflicts like this. And, because just as you described and just as you've described, both of these things are occurring simultaneously, and that kind of freedom is lost in the midst.
And is this both and type of language that you've just given us, Is this something that is, trying to keep the space open in your experience of American universities, or is the battle being lost?
I hesitate to make a pronouncement. I think that the battle is still underway. I don't think we know exactly how this is going to proceed. I don't think we can say right now whether around the world this space, these freedoms are going to be strengthened or enlarged, or whether they're going to continue to be constrained. I don't think that we know at this point. I don't think I can say, even in the United States, I know at this point which way it's going to go, whether in fact it's going to be enlarged or continue to be constrained. So I think it's at issue.
So can we just move on to talk about, because you've got to pass your Franciscan background and the work you've done with Sojourners, Jim Wallace, I know Jim, he's a good man. Of mine. Yeah, a great man, and all of that sort of stuff. Can you tell me about some of the sort of activism that you've been involved in, and some of the way in which that might play into your work that you do now? Environmental stuff, or stuff about racism? There's lots of stuff that you've
There's
been
lots of
on.
Stuff. It's difficult to think about how I could start that.
Yeah.
Let me begin by saying I'm on a number of boards. A board of an organization that called Catholic Climate Covenant, that's concerned about environmental issues around the world from a faith-based perspective. I'm on the board of an organization called Catholic Mobilizing Network, which is the principal religious organization fighting the death penalty in the United States. As you heard from my introduction, I've been involved in advancing the President Biden's campaign in the past, President Obama's campaign in the past, and issues associated with both of those campaigns have been on my plate. So, in general, the whole range of social justice issues in one way or another have been issues that I have advanced from a faith perspective in public life.
Do you really think that if Trump wins, he'll let you keep your job? I mean, given the fact that were you chair of Obama for Catholics for Obama?
So technically, I have another year and 3/4 in my job, and there isn't a normal way in which a president could, a new president could fire me from that job. That said, I recognize that in the past, former President Trump has acted in ways as president that go outside normal norms. He has asked other commissioners and other commissions to step down. It's conceivable, I suppose, that he may ask me to step down, but I'd be really surprised. I should mention that the organization that I belong with now, USERF, is a congressional organization. So we were created by Congress, and technically we should be outside the president's range of control. But of course, presidents have the ability to use what we call the bully pulpit to make changes beyond what's allowed under law.
I mean, I guess if Trump became president and they would want to put a more conservative, more evangelical figure into your job, there might be some pressure to refocus your work on, for instance, the persecution of Christians around the world.
So that it's interesting to think. First, I should say that it's a bipartisan commission. So currently it's composed of 5 Democratic appointees and 4 Republican appointees. And in the future, if I were to step down, that wouldn't change. There would still need to be the minority party. The party that doesn't hold the White House would have 4 seats, and the party that has the White House would have 5 seats. And that means that Democrats would be able to appoint, if Trump won, Democrats would be able to appoint those 4 seats. So I can't imagine that can change. That's statutory law. That said, yes, I think President Trump would prefer a different USERF, than what we have now. Whether in fact he would, take the steps in that direction, I don't know.
I think that's a really good way to end. thank you so much for just answering all these questions and
appreciate
being
it.
open to dialogue. Thank you very much indeed for coming amongst us. It was fascinating to you, and good luck with all that you do.
Honored to be here, Giles. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.